hidden in the vaults of the CIA lies the blueprint for one of the darkest experiments in American history. This is the story of Project MKUltra, the CIA's covert, controversial program that used unwitting civilians as test subjects in a series of psychological experiments that pushed the boundaries of ethics, science, and sanity. Under the guise of national security, doctors, government agents, and scientists conducted psychological warfare not on enemies, but on their own citizens. Men and women drugged without their consent, memories erased, minds broken. In fact, many never came back. For decades, the government denied it, files were destroyed, witnesses silenced. But the truth has a way of surfacing, piece by horrifying piece.
Welcome to the Retrospect podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Stoney.
Hello.
And Jason.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
Well, it's going good.
Yeah?
Can't complain. I don't know. Let's see what's going on. Well, nothing really in particular. Getting ready for a trip here in a couple of weeks. Going to the beach.
Nice.
All right. So, going to be doing that. And
it's been a while since I've been to the beach.
Yeah, girlfriend and I are going to be heading that way with my parents. And I said I got some family on the in Melbourne, Florida.
Okay.
So that's where we're going. So we'll be out there for a few days and be a nice getaway. Get out on the beach and drink a little wine and just chill out and just hear the ocean.
Love that.
You know, as I said, there's a big difference between being on the beach on the Atlantic and then the Gulf of Mexico. I should say now the Gulf of America.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's that's where I've been going now lately. The last few years now, I'm going to the beach. We go there now because we have obviously free lodging.
Yeah.
And other than just paying for our flight, because we got to fly into Orlando, and then it's about. They usually pick us up. It's about 45 minutes to an hour.
That's not bad at all.
To Melbourne Beach because they actually live on the island side.
Wow.
So literally their house, you crossed up kind of like the main highway, and that's the Atlantic Ocean. So it's really nice. So it's not a touristy area. These are residents.
Yeah.
So the beaches, you go out there, and it's like you look to your left and to your right, and it's pretty much you have the beach to yourself.
Wow.
So I can't deal with those days of showing up at the high rise and everybody's down there like ants, and I just can't deal with it anymore. So I'm so glad that we have this place to go.
Yeah.
And so looking forward to that. And as I said, we got a couple of trips this year coming up.
Fun.
So it's gonna be a fun time. But I know my girlfriend, she is constantly telling me 2 weeks, Jason. So you're not counting, huh? so she's excited. So
well, we had an episode a couple weeks ago about packing. Have you started packing yet?
Not yet, but she talked to me about that episode. She goes, she was like, Jason.
Oh man.
I went, yeah, I said I'm not very good at the packing thing. I'm just kind of one of those last minute people. So it's
funny.
Yeah.
You're getting called out on your own show.
I'm getting called out on my own show, you know.
Oh man, that's great.
But
she just gave you the head nod of decision.
she's like, but she said she enjoyed that episode though.
It was a fun episode.
It was. It was. Well, hopefully, maybe our listeners out there will suggest some other kind of episodes like that.
My youngest brother and his significant other are taking a fairly long trip to Japan, and he took his biggest suitcase that he did not fill completely because he was like, I know for a fact I'm going to be there for a little less than 2 weeks, and I'm going to buy a bunch of stuff there to bring home. So I'm going to fit a bunch of stuff. And I was like, funny enough, we had a podcast episode with that very same thing of I always forget to leave a lot of extra room in my
because
my
you
bags.
buy stuff sitting
Yeah, and I was like, that's very smart. So he had his carry-on full of his stuff, and he had his very, very big bag that he's I haven't used since.
So where are they staying? 2 weeks?
I think it's a little less. I think it's 10 days or something.
So they're just going to bounce around?
Yeah. So there's a couple different places. They're going with a travel agency or something. So they have
He knows how to speak Japanese?
He has a tour guide that's with his
well, that'll be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool. I'm excited for him.
I'd like to.
So yeah,
I'd love to. My dream trip is to go to Italy. So that's where I want to go. So I think we're gonna, girlfriend and I are gonna definitely make that gonna happen one day.
Definitely.
Well, she is of the Italian persuasion.
Yeah, she's half. She's half, so just like me,
I'll
I'm
live
half.
vicariously through you on your trip because I want to go so bad.
Drink a lot of wine,
please, for me.
Drink a lot of wine. Actually, good wine.
Good
the
wine.
wine in Europe's a little bit different than it is here in the U.S.
Oh yeah.
So, but
so we got something really a little scary for today. At
you
least
know,
I think.
I absolutely, when we were, I've seen this topic come up just in scrolling YouTube videos and just different material I've just in researching other topics.
I feel like if you even dip your toe into the conspiracy theory territory, all of a sudden a lot of these kind of things,
a lot of this stuff comes up. So it was it was fascinating.
Well, MK Ultra is the topic for today, and that's actually the conspiracy that was real. Imagine your government running a secret mind controlling experiments on its own citizens without their consent. And that's not the first time our government has done that. Sounds like a sci-fi play, right?
Oh, 100%.
No, it wasn't. This is the story of MK Ultra.
Yeah, it's MK Ultra was it really was a bit shocking of what was done to people. And I'm going to tell you, there's so many different rabbit holes you could go down regarding this topic because it was really an umbrella type of program. There were a lot of kind of sub-programs associated that were they kind of fell under MK Ultra.
Right. Well, remember the Tuskegee Airmen; they were giving those guys diseases,
syphilis,
herpes, syphilis, and that was in World War II. So they were doing this.
It actually predated.
That's what I'm saying.
I think it started in the 20s.
Yeah. And so I was just using them as an example because they were World War II pilots, but that the government's been up to some sketchy shit.
Well,
now MK Ultra started in the early 1950s. The officially was sanctioned in 1953. So, but we know
its precursors begin in during World War II.
Right.
I just for our listeners, what was MK Ultra? As far as a definition, there's so many different ones. I lifted one from the testimony of Admiral Stansfield Turner and his testimony to the U.S. Senate on September 21st, 1977. And it basically, he's called it, MK Ultra was an umbrella project under which a broad spectrum of sensitive activities was financed. Wow. Some of these activities dealt with research with behavioral modification, primarily by means of drugs and hypnosis, involving tests on human volunteers and in some cases on unwitting subjects. And I think
you need to add electroshock therapy and sensory deprivation to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was
LSD was the preferred drug.
Yeah. I mean, LSD was. And as I'm saying, this as I said, the the precursor to MK Ultra really goes back into World War II. There were some contracts with people on the use of hypnosis. This started out as Project Bluebird. Bluebird then morphed into Project Artichoke, and then eventually to, as Stoney mentioned in 53, eventually it was given the term MK Ultra, which I was trying to figure out, what does MK Ultra stand for? And I kind of I was watching a podcast, and they kind of explained some of how these terminology, how the CIA kind of classified, named things.
Well, there's a division. It's the CIA's Technical Services Division,
correct,
that actually gives these names.
Yeah.
They have a division for coming up with
Project
Artichoke. Yeah. I mean, what, really?
Yeah, well, MK actually stands for TSS.
Yeah.
Technical Services Staff. Ultra was a designation during the World War II era of the most top secret classification. So if
Ultra
you can think
secret.
so you can think of, there's top secret, above top secret, they called Ultra. Ultra was basically only a few people knew that it even existed. So that's not even everybody in the intelligence community knows it even exists. So, they operate in these kind of silos, so to speak, where there's always plausible deniability. Some people know about it, other people don't know. So if these people get questioned, well, I don't know I don't know anything about that.
Technically, the head of the CIA may not know what's going on.
Exactly. It's funny how this works,
but it really came about through a lot of the Cold War paranoia. The U.S. feared that Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean mind control tactics were happening because in the Korean War, they were brainwashing prisoners.
Yeah, did you see that? That was kind of weird. I was catching some of that.
And they wanted a psychological edge on espionage and interrogation, but it actually kind of turned into, because of the success, into something else.
Yeah, I was watching some old video footage of that. That's really, it's so funny. What kind of motivated these people
Fear.
To really go down this road? And it was what was happening is these GIs coming back from the Korean War, at least some of them, were basically claiming the U.S. government was using germ warfare on the North Koreans. Well, they were like, what's going on? Why would these guys say that? So they were utterly convinced, just like Stoney mentioned, that, well, they may have mastered mind control. And, as well as in brainwashing. And we know in some other episodes we've done that, the Soviets were involved in this stuff even back in the 1920s to some degree. So there was some degree of fear. It's like, wait a minute, they're going to be able to send these people in our country. They can start undermining the population, and they could be, I think y'all probably all remember this, the Manchurian Candidate.
Yep, I was going to mention that.
Yeah. So,
it's kind of funny
interesting
what
how
fear can drive even ethics to the sidelines. They were scared that our enemies were going to get this edge and use it. Like you said, those soldiers were coming back saying some crazy stuff, and they're like, wait a minute, what? And so that put them in an interesting place.
Well, hypnosis and these kinds of things actually go way back in history.
Well, think about it. What happens in those POW camps? That's, in some ways, that's kind of a hypnosis thing there, but there's isolation.
Oh, yeah.
There's sensory deprivation in there.
Torture.
Torture.
Yeah.
You're using
hunger
hunger. You're using all of these things
to break you
and change who you are. And what were they doing in the Vietnam War? When Ding Dong Jane Fonda went over there and, she saw the evidence of the torture. She saw the evidence of the brainwashing, trying to get our prisoners to say things. They handed her these little help us, and she handed them back to the Vietnamese jailers.
Right.
She should have went to jail right there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people with Jane.
Yeah,
Jane Fonda.
But
she'll never probably be forgiven for what she did.
Not by me. But it's the evidence is there that this stuff has a success rate. And unfortunately, it was used against our people. And then so the government decided, well, let's continue this and see what we can do, and started doing some other things, using these experiments in psychiatric hospitals, in prisons, and front organizations pulling people off of the street.
Yeah, the CIA kind of operates that way. I think I've read they fronted like there was a company or a fictional company called like the Office of Human Ecology or something like that, where a lot of this money was kind of funneled. And then from there, it was funneled to all these different research institutes this training. I think there was like I think I saw something like 150 research institutions and hospitals, and that were used.
Yeah, but see, they did even better than that. There were brothels in San Francisco and New York that were run by the CIA.
Yeah,
and these men would go into these brothels and be given drugs without them even knowing it.
Yeah,
they were secretly dosed with these drugs.
Yeah, it was quite. I think that was Operation. I think it was Midnight Express or
something like that.
Something like that. I think I have the actual name written down.
But here we are. We're not supposed to operate inside the United States of America, but we can run some brothels in New York and San Francisco.
And they were loosely. They were loosely. Loosely. It was no. I should say. There was not much oversight, so even some of these agents were partaking of the hallucinogens and all that. So it was just kind of I hate to say it, it just was a terrible situation. But as I said, I mean, fear is, and you kind of allow your mind to go down those dark paths like that, especially you got authority and people are not questioning you. I mean, people are afraid of the Red Menace. And yeah, I mean,
well, that's an interesting and that's a dive maybe we can do for another show. But what rights are we giving up for national security? What rights are we willing to give up for national security? Maybe we could put that on the whiteboard for a future episode. And because these people gave up their rights without knowing it, against their will, so to speak, for our national security by our own government. With a constitution there that says the Constitution doesn't dictate what the citizen does. The Constitution dictates what the government can and can't do. Yeah. And it just took away those people's rights like that. Mm. Now, do I mind them going and getting somebody from another country and doing it? I'm not saying I agree with that either. But to our own citizens, I have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
can we do that? Maybe another show. Maybe we could find a constitutional attorney or somebody that can talk about the Constitution on giving up our rights for national security.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, fear will make a lot of people do a lot of things. I think we saw that during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, as I said, fear is a powerful tool, and people say that they wouldn't do something. Sometimes I'm like, well,
you don't know until you're there.
Until you're actually subjected to the test.
Well, and I've had the same conversation about sometimes people, like, being without food or water for a long amount of times, or being off on a deserted island, and like almost going feral, like you losing your mind in that aspect of like people,
because self-survival kicks
whatever
in.
Right. And there's people right now, and when you're clear of mind and have all your needs being met right now, you're like, oh, I would never do that. But like, you don't really know until like you are without food and you are stranded or something, where you're going to become.
What's that room in New York? It's the completely silent
room. The anechoic chamber. Yeah.
Yes. And people can't go an hour. Because do an hour.
It's a complete. They can turn all the lights off, so it's complete darkness, and it also is like it takes away all your sound, all the sound.
Yeah, they basically isolate you. You're almost like in a void.
Yeah,
so
it's hard to.
I'd kind of like to do that because I'm half deaf, so does that count?
Could
I still get the $1 million if I last an hour?
Well,
but because I could use some silence. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I think people need to understand that the CIA. I mean, they were actually created in 1947. Before that, intelligence gathering in the United States was really diffused among the branches of the military at that time. Eventually, an entity was created, I believe it was in 1943. It was the Office of Strategic Services. And that's where, actually, that's the precursor to the CIA. Mm-hmm. And the first director was a General Wild Bill Donovan. And he brought on a guy by the name of Stanley Lovell, who's a Boston industrialist, to really kind of break ground on all this kind of new stuff. And just to kind of give people the idea of the tone that was set. So people kind of wonder, how did these doctors and scientists kind of go down this path? Just to kind of give you an idea of what was said to all these scientists. He says, to stimulate the PEX bad boy beneath the surface of every American scientist, and to them, throw all of your law-abiding concepts out of the window. Here's a chance to raise merry hell. So this is the tone in which this stuff is really fertilized. Mm-hmm. So here you have basically the in essence, the director of what would be the CIA, basically saying, we're going to open all the doors. Nothing is off the table. And what's funny, some of these original people actually were sent to the Nuremberg trials. Matter of fact, one of these names that we'll bring up was actually brought there to interview Rudolf Hess to see if he was psychologically well enough to face trial.
Oh, okay.
So while they were there, what did they get exposed to? All these Nazi experiments that were done to these prisoners in Dachau and all these concentration camps that we find horrific today. And they took some of this and brought this back to the United States. So this is what these people are thinking.
Yeah.
They're going, I want to kind of open these doors too. Unfortunately, in doing that, it really created an environment that today we would find quite horrifying, and what it did to people. And as I said, a lot of these people never came back. Matter of fact, there was a memo I saw of, and it stated in the memo of like, what do we do with these people after we're done with them?
Yikes.
I mean,
they just let them go.
Do you kill them?
They just let them. There's a lot of people that lived their
some
whole
of them
life
did. Some of them did.
without ever knowing they were part of this.
Exactly.
Some people said, "Oh, something happened to me, and I don't know what it is."
Right.
But then there were some people that could have been killed because of it too.
It's this stuff was absolutely a I mean, it was eye-opening to me. It was eye-opening to me. I really...
Well, the MK Ultra is not just a Cold War artifact. It's really the case study in power, secrecy, and ethical collapse.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at it, that is about as far as it gets. So when we fail to hold institutions accountable, history doesn't just repeat, it mutates. It turns into something else. So when we did, like when Jason was saying, what the Nazis were doing, we took it to a whole nother level and went a whole nother direction in it. Right. And then when they got kind of caught with their hands in the cookie jars, we shut that down. And then we just bury it somewhere else under another name, artichoke or beef stroganoff. Operation Beef Stroganoff. That's the next one we need.
There you go.
Can we get an Operation Beef Stroganoff?
It depends on what it is, though.
Maybe I could get a job in that division coming up with these names.
Maybe.
If someone in the CIA needs me to do that, just reach
I think
out.
you have to ride the fine line between it sounding cool, but also sounding inconspicuous enough to where you can't get in trouble. Like Operation Artichoke, you're like, oh, that's probably
beef stroganoff.
Yeah, it's like it's probably nothing special, but it's like actually it's like a crazy, brainwashing experiment.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it was like 150 different like sub programs.
And I think I've heard that that's what the CIA does. I'm not sure they did that during this
and
time,
believe me,
but they over compartmentalize to like
they do that on purpose.
Yeah.
That way, it's you create more plausible deniability.
Yeah.
So I know 4 of the experiments were on children.
Wow.
So in 1959, the children's I think it's International Summer Village. This experiment received money from the Human Ecology. Remember that term I brought up? That's one of the front companies. Kids were brought in to this summer camp, and they were looking at how do kids communicate with each other when they don't understand their language. Mm-hmm. So how do kids from Japan, America, Australia, you name it, they all come together. Okay, how does that work? Almost sort of like a Lord of the Flies type of thing, So yeah, believe me, nothing was off the table.
No,
nothing was off the table.
And that's scary.
And that's one of the things when I was researching it, coming up with the MK Ultra slaves, like Britney Spears and Kanye West.
Okay,
it's still going on.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They've made these people slaves. I wanted to go that route, but I said no. I want to talk more about the real stuff. But we don't know. What if it's not right now in the world? Think about this. 2 years ago, the conspiracy theorists were up 32-0. Mm-hmm. Right now, today, they're up 74-0.
Wow.
Well, as I said,
so we're saying it could be a conspiracy, but hey, in a couple of years, are we going to find out that some of these people really are MK Ultra slaves, just under Operation Beef Stroganoff?
People, look. I mean, that was what the
Candied Yams. There we go. Operation Candied Yams.
Yeah. That sounds better.
That was what all these projects were trying to elicit information out of people.
Right.
Okay. Also, it was about implanting memories.
Yeah.
Being able to reprogram people where they would
to be assassins. Yes,
to be assassins, to do something and then absolutely have no knowledge that they did it.
Yeah.
Whether they were successful, you could say maybe they were. Now, they would say the reason funding was eventually discontinued, I believe it was defunded in 1864.
73 is when it.
Well, the programs ended, but I think money.
Oh, okay.
Dried up.
Yeah.
But it was a.
Was it because they got caught?
Well, I think what happened was they had been spending all this money. This thing had been going on for years. I don't think they were getting the results they wanted.
Right.
Out of it, I think people started talking about it, and there's lawsuits.
Or did they get the results?
Oh, maybe they did.
They had to shut it down because they were getting the results.
Maybe they did, and they subcontracted the stuff out. And now,
you had a couple people come forward talking about MK Ultra, and like Valerie Wolf, she was a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. And she came forward, who testified before Congress about patients remembering abuse from MK Ultra.
Right.
James Stanley, Army sergeant, dosed, ruined his life.
And what if it
Frank Olson, he was a scientist, allegedly dosed with LSD, who died under mysterious circumstances.
Well, that now Frank Olson, that brings back, because I believe Frank Olson his death is really what kind of started unraveling this whole thing, because he was an Army scientist. He'd worked in the drug part of this program, and he was dosed by his superiors. Unfortunately, he kind of ran his mouth at a party, and I think he said a few things. Some people say he was on the verge of maybe becoming a whistleblower.
Okay.
They couldn't allow him to spill the beans. So after this event that occurred at this party, he actually offered his resignation. They said, no, look, go to New York, take a break. They sent him to his hotel in New York.
And guess what?
And supposedly he had a psychiatric break.
Yep.
And he jumped out of a 10-story window or whatever.
My man got pushed.
Well, the funny thing is, at the time, the family always suspected something different.
Of course.
And they dug his body up and actually did another autopsy on him. And they determined that he actually had blood force trauma before he fell out the window. So, yeah, probably the CIA probably could not have him running his mouth on this stuff. And but yeah, the Frank Olson case is really, I think, really what blew it open.
Yes. I knew if I threw that your way, you were gonna jump on that.
Frank Olson is very well known. That case is very well known. Matter of fact, I think the family, it was in '94. They had his body, if I remember right. It was in the early '90s. They dug him up to do another autopsy on him, and just too much was happening. The CIA today will say, well, the CIA was in a different place at that time. And look, a lot of these psychological experiments, this was all new.
Yeah.
Today you have the hindsight of a lot more research. At that time, there was nothing. It was like, okay, all they had was what the Nazis had done in Germany. A lot of people don't want to admit, but a lot of America's advances came at the expense of some very grisly experiments that were done. That were done on people during World War II.
What was the guy with the space program? He was the Nazi who developed the V2 rocket or whatever. They snuck him off.
Well,
they beat the Russians. The Russians were after him too.
Yeah, because they want him for themselves. For
their stuff, and they got him over here, a bunch of paperwork, some of the rockets, some of his scientists, and he's the one who was the head of NASA. What was his name? Here comes with the brain damage again. Come on, guys, help me. What was his name?
I can't think of his name right now. I'll probably remember it in a little while, but it's not coming to my... Yeah, well. But as I said, they really used a lot. They really got heavy into drugs. I know Timothy Leary credited the CIA for actually kickstarting this consciousness movement. I mean, I really believe that to this day. I believe the CIA unwittingly created the hippie culture that eventually came about in the later 60s.
Yeah.
I really do. I'm going to tell you another interesting angle on this that I found pretty fascinating is MK Ultra and Manson.
Really?
And the Manson murders with Tate and all that mess. There's a book that just came out. I was watching a video on it. Timothy O'Neill, I believe, just published. It's probably not. It's better been a few years back, but it's called Chaos.
Okay.
And it talks about Manson involved with MK Ultra experiments with scientists that were involved with the MK Ultra project. He participated. Another person that was involved with MK Ultra was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
Oh, really?
Yes. He's another guy that participated in these experiments. So, what made these guys completely just wig out?
Right.
Everybody knows what Charles Manson, who Charles Manson was.
Right.
He was the guy who thought there was going to be a giant race war, and it would go around the world. And I'm quoting him, that the blacks would win this race war, and at the end, they would be too incompetent to run the world, and that's when Manson's followers would come out and become the new rulers of the world. I mean, that was Manson's thinking at the time.
I'm sorry, Werner von Braun. He became a U.S. citizen, and his team developed a Saturn V rocket, which was crucial for the Apollo. But he was actually a Nazi rocket scientist.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I had to look it up.
A lot of the advances in that we you have to credit the Nazis for giving that to us. So, but one of the drugs that was used, LSD, is probably one of the most powerful hallucinogenic compounds there is. And
when
believe it
you
or not,
add that to sleep deprivation and some other things,
oh gosh,
it goes to another level.
They utilize LSD, they use PCP, and then they use another drug I saw was called Cure Air, I believe it's pronounced. It's actually a compound used by South African natives to paralyze their prey when they hunt. So not only were they paralyzing people, then administering, the way this drug works, it basically shuts your body down. You can't move, but you're aware of your surroundings. You can't feel anything.
Mm-hmm. I think they pronounce it
See,
curare.
Curare. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. But the funny thing about how LSD came about, I didn't realize this either, but it was discovered by accident in Sweden at the Sandoz Labs in Switzerland by a guy by the name of Albert Hoffman. He stumbled upon it. And at the time, there was like, I was reading that there was like 100 million doses they had in the lab. And they were terrified, the Americans were terrified that the Soviets were going to buy up the supply of LSD. So the United States, they bought up all doses of the world supply of LSD. So just to kind of give you an idea of what they were willing to do, to do that. So,
which is crazy to think that
we bought drugs.
Not only that, but all of them.
All of it. We bought the whole world supply of it.
Wild.
But to prevent the Soviets from getting it because of the fear that they were going to master mind control and Manchurian candidate type techniques on everybody else. So we bought the whole supply up, and we utilize. So of course they got to utilize all this stuff. So that's where you get stories of all these different programs of you know hiring prostitutes, bringing Johns, like Sony was saying, doing on children. They took advantage of mental institutions. Matter of fact, I read even Tulane University.
Okay.
Was a part of MK Ultra.
Really?
Yes.
Get out.
Yep. So there were experiments done as part of MK Ultra done at Tulane University.
Wow.
Which doesn't surprise me because I'm doing research on another topic. I believe Dr. Oshner was very much in the pocket of the CIA. That we all know about Oshner Hospital.
Here in Louisiana.
There's a nice video that a gentleman put out. He's now operating in, I believe, in some South American country. He's an American. He was a graduate of Louisiana State University. He's I believe, a doctor. And he talks about Dr. Oshner and his connections with the CIA. So it doesn't surprise me at Tulane that they were involved with MK Ultra at all. I mean, it just, I was like, yeah, of course.
You talk about hitting close to home.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's good stuff. Matter of fact, the
CIA must have they bury seals. I mean, look at all the drug stuff that the CIA's done.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy. You know, that was a great movie. I don't know if y'all ever saw that with I forgot who the actor was, but the CIA in Louisiana goes a long way. But JFK comes from the CIA and the mob.
Oh yeah, matter of fact, they even talk about Oswald and Ruby with MK Ultra. Those names are, that intersects to some degree. But the LSD supply was the Eli Lilly Company in 53-54. The United States just paid $400,000 to buy all that. I knew I had the amount of money that the U.S. government spent. Now, that's $400,000 back then.
Oh, gosh. What year was that?
53, 54.
Okay, give me just a second.
Yeah, do the $400,000 in the 50s at that time.
Well, MK Ultra showed us that, number one, the CIA experimented with manipulating consciousness and using drugs, trauma, and isolation. They believed that the mental state could be altered exploited, or even reprogrammed.
Yep.
And, they were testing people, unwitting subjects, proving a willingness to cross every ethical boundary. And so, what are we allowing our government to do even to us? I mean, there has to be some accountability for this. Because the MK Ultra shows us exactly what our government was willing to do and take away from the U.S. citizen, which, according to a republic, congressional republic, the U.S. citizen is above all things, and they were really willing to destroy that for some fear.
You said $450 million.
$400,000.
400,000. Wait, hold on, I didn't.
This is 53, 54 now. That's $400,000. That's a lot of money.
Oh yeah. Let's see. That is $4.7 million.
Yeah. So they spent.
Yeah.
That's not a lot of when you look at all the what Doge is exposing right now.
Yeah, but you guys said that was when we were still on the gold standard at that time. So it's not you really have to kind of. Money was a lot more scarce than it was, post
Chelsea
Nixon.
Clinton got 3 or 4 times that for her house and her wedding.
But that's I venture to say what we have now is fake money, but it's whatever it is. But that's what we have. But so funny, the Eli Lilly company. You know what other drug that they produce?
What's that?
Yeah,
Prozac.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, you know what else they do? Monjaro, Jardiance. Ask me how many of those 2 I take.
Mm.
Yeah,
so
both of them. Those are diabetes drugs.
That Prozac, that comes from that LSD. Wow. It affects the same areas of the brain. So, that was quite interesting of seeing that connection there.
But you see, one of the things that kind of gets me about this, and we've talked about a lot of things on this show, when this started, bread still had 3 ingredients. And Rockefeller had already taken over the big pharma and a lot of the other stuff too. But now that what are we doing? What is the government doing to us now that we've added all of these chemicals into our system? Are they still doing it now with this added chemical? What about all the trauma that our people are going through? You know what I'm saying? With the chemicals and the destroying the American family, we have a lot of mental illness now. Are they adding the drugs? Are they adding the sleep deprivation? Are they adding the sensory deprivation to now all the trauma in our lives? Is that going to be another ingredient into this mix that the government is using to create that Manchurian candidate, so to speak? Because now you've got somebody who's been so traumatized and so looking for attention or acceptance. They're already programmed for looking for those type things in their head. What is that going to do?
As I'm saying, you're playing around with it. To understand what they're trying to do, they believe that through electric shocks, through drugs, through sensory deprivation, through all these techniques that they can wipe the mind clean and then build you back up. And it's sort of like wiping a hard drive clean and then putting new information in there.
Right.
That was the thinking that they were trying to do. So all these techniques was to break you down to the most basic level. Unfortunately, it didn't work out quite the way they expected it to.
Did it. And because it did, they had to change it. They told us it ended in 1973. But, they supposedly abandoned their obsession with controlling the human mind. But what if it didn't end? What if that was just the beginning and they knew the success behind it and they had to bury it and make it something else?
Well, we'll never know because all the documents relating to this, a lot of these, when these chief people all left the CIA, they destroyed everything. So what you have now is really just piecemeal stuff. You all that was left by the time you get to these Senate hearings where a lot of this is coming out in the 70s. Gerald Ford issued an executive order. I've got the actual executive order that kind of really opened up, but all they had were really financial documents. Nothing about notes regarding the actual experiments. So the only thing that can go on is like, okay, you got all these bills. Okay, well, what were you buying? Okay, so that's the problem. And I even think today why the DOD can't pass an audit is because there's so many black projects.
Oh, absolutely.
100%
agree with that.
And I guarantee some of this money is probably going to some of that to some degree. Whether they're still focusing on this, maybe they've moved on to other things, but it's still these sort of things are buried in these big federal budgets that you just can't.
But what if it just disappeared and became something else? Okay, hear me out on this one. Why use drugs when you can feed people algorithms, social media, curated news, and now AI-powered feeds are precision tools of influence? Plus all of the drugs that they're putting in our bodies through vaccines, food that we eat, things like that. MK Ultra 2.0 wouldn't need to break into a room. It could reshape their identity on public. Yeah. A digital experiment so subtle that you think it's a cage, it's built all around you.
Oh,
we live on that every single day. Every time you scroll, your profile gets sharper, but whose hands are really holding the digital scalpel? And then you add that to the stuff that's going on into the world today, plus the drugs that are being introduced into us.
Right.
Think about that. Bread. I've said this before. At the time MK Ultra started, bread had 3 ingredients. Now it has 39. 36 of them are some type of a petroleum-based chemical that you can't even pronounce.
Well, our friend Brandon came on the show a couple times and talked about all the synthetic chemicals that are in our bodies now. Some of this wetware stuff and how this might interact with frequencies from the telephone. So, yeah, could these experiments have jumped from actual drugs to now utilizing chemicals that you're eating every day in our food?
But then add that to social media. What if that's the new group hypnosis?
It might be.
You see what I'm saying? How many times did Brandon even talk about stuff that they do with your phone, when you're watching TikTok and things like that? What if that's the new...
That's the new drug. That's the new drug now.
Well, it's the new drug, but it's also, can it be the new hypnosis?
It might be.
You got all these kids now with ADHD and all these different diagnoses, and they're proving it to be the drugs that we're taking in our bodies. And now all they do is sit there with their phones. Yeah. What if that's the hypnosis that they're using? What if it is MK Ultra 2.0 or Project, what did we say? What was the last one?
Candied Yams.
Candied Yams. What if it's Project Candied Yams now?
Yeah. Well, a lot of this, did y'all see they developed a super LSD called BZ? Did y'all see that?
I saw that in my research.
Gives you a 4-day trip.
Yep. Why would you want that?
4-day. Yeah, the General Counsel, during these Senate hearings, the General Counsel of the Army released a list of like 125 drugs that were utilized. So there's drug names we don't even know that were developed for the purposes of these projects. So, and this is interesting. A lot of this was funded. All these were by the CIA, the Office of Public Health Services, and believe it or not, the Masons through the Scottish Rite Foundation.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Found that interesting. Matt, we talked about some of the experiments done at Tulane. Dr. Russell Monroe, he was the head of psychiatry department at the University of Maryland. He was one of the doctors involved in some of these projects that kind of fell under him. Did y'all read about Ravenscraig up in Montreal?
No.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
I watched several videos of what that Dr. Ewan Cameron, really did some pretty heinous stuff up there.
Really?
And matter of fact, it was enough that they sued. the CIA. And the problem is the Canadian government was just in on it just as much.
Well, this dude was the
Yikes.
president of the American Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and even the World Psychiatric Association at one time. He was the head
Conflict
of
of interest.
Yeah, I know, right? You see what I'm saying? And affiliated with McGill University.
Yep.
And he was seen as a pioneer until it was revealed that he was conducting psychological torture.
Yeah, he
This dude was something. He is psychic driving.
Yep.
Is what they called it. Okay. And it's it was his core method of reprogramming human behavior. And it involved 2 stages. I'm glad you brought that up because I was wondering how I was going to throw this in. Here.
I was getting to him. I was getting to that because there's I had a lot of material on that.
Yeah, I have pages on it. De-patterning, destruction of the mind, and you talked about that earlier. He used massive electroshock therapy, up to 30 or 40 times stronger than standard.
Yeah.
Wow.
Drug-induced comas. Patients were kept unconscious for weeks at a time using barbiturates. LSD and other psychedelics were administered to disorient and destabilize, and then a lot of sensory deprivation and isolation to break down that psyche.
I think there's a lot that we don't fully understand about sleep deprivation and the psychiatric
Well, the
stuff.
Russians did. What was that big study they did with sleep deprivation, and the guys saw demons, and they heard the demons back there. But then his second part was through reprogramming through repetition, aka psychic driving. Patients were played recorded messages for up to 16 hours a day, often for weeks on end. Message included things like, "You're a failure. You will begin to trust others." And the goal was behavioral engineering, stripping down and rebuilding the human mind.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And this was everyday people.
Yeah.
He was pulling off the street and doing this to. You know, they were suffering from, mild depression or postpartum issues or even just unrelated physical ailments.
Yeah, Cameron was born and raised in Scotland. He was the oldest son of a Presbyterian minister. He did his pre-grad in psychology at the University of Glasgow and continued his training in the U.S. at Johns Hopkins University. He received his M.D. from the University of London in 1936. He was a father of 4 kids and worked and lived in Albany, New York. In 43, now this was the guy that I was telling you about that went to Nuremberg.
Okay.
He was asked to, in 43, he was asked to consult at McGill University in Montreal. He was one of 3 professionals who evaluated Nazi Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess and deemed him fit to stand trial. Now, I believe Rudolf Hess, if I remember right, he didn't get hung. He was the one stuck in prison and died mysteriously in prison.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not mistaken, because there was a Nazi that, for whatever reason, they didn't hang him like they did many of the others. I believe Hess was put in prison until he was an old man, and then one day, and he was solitary. He would go out in the yard by himself. I forget what country he was held at, but eventually they found him dead. I think somebody killed him.
Right.
But yeah, I found so Cameron, he's the one that really dived into what these Nazi doctors did. I mean, we all heard, Dr. Mengele and some of these others of what they did. So he takes this information. So this guy is doing these tests on these people at Ravenscraig. And as I said, it was some terrible, terrible things. I mean, he ruined
it's like Gene
so
Steele.
many people.
Yes, she went in for anxiety, and she came out unable to recognize her own children.
Okay.
Linda McDonald lost all of her memory of her life before 1963, a specific date. she had to relearn basic skills like using the toilet or reading. I mean, from a specific date, 1963 back, she didn't know anything. And there were hundreds of others that were never identified.
Yeah, his philosophy was he was convinced that mental illness was contagious.
Whoa, that's not good.
Between 1957 and 64, he saw an estimated 80 plus patients were subject to Cameron's worst methods under Subproject 68, a CIA-funded MK Ultra program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Subproject 68. That's what I had.
And his front organization was the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology.
Wow.
Victims and families actually, filed class action lawsuits, and the Canadian government actually paid out $100,000 in settlements to 77 victims. The U.S. government never formally apologized or did anything.
Wow.
Well, no, they're not going to.
No, they never will.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a...
I mean, he destroyed lives. He violated every principle of medical ethics and raised global questions about informed consent, psychiatric power, and the relationship between science and state control.
Yeah, that project I was telling you with the prostitutes and the houses in New York and San Francisco, that was called Operation Midnight Climax. Yeah. Yeah, I knew I had it in my notes somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah, it was they would basically slip those things in and CIA agents through a one-way mirror would just kind of watch the action. Can you imagine just sitting there watch
it's crazy that
guys going crazy with women in there and all that.
It's crazy that like you buy up the world's supply of a drug and you just try and find ways to use it. Is what it feels
That's
like.
That's exactly what they did.
Crazy.
I mean, I was reading they would hit you with LSD in one arm and PCP in another. Oh yeah, a lot of people died
with different doses. Okay, a little bit this one, more of this one, and the next guy was a little bit more of this one, a little bit less of that one.
Yeah, some of the famous participants that I was reading about, maybe some of our listeners might recognize some of these names. Ken Kinsey, the author of the One Floor Over the Cuckoo's Nest, as well as Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter.
Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Professional tennis player Harold Blower. He went to the New York Psychiatric Institute for help with depression following the breakup of his marriage. Without his knowing, he was injected with experimental drugs as part, and he died.
Really?
Yeah, died from it.
That's wild.
I mean, can you imagine just going in, I'm depressed because I'm just miserable that I'm just going through this terrible
just kill you.
event. I'm thinking I'm going to go get help, and here they shoot me up with LSD and PCP.
And tell you, these are advanced psychiatric procedures. We're trying some new advanced stuff on you. Yeah, okay.
I've said this about technology and medicine. You never want the first batch.
Or a car. The first year a car is made.
Technology, whatever. It can apply to many things, but in my world, that's what I've said. I was like, if it's the first run of medicine, I don't think I want to be a part of it. If it's the first generation of this technological product, it's probably going to have bugs in it. I'll wait for the second version of it because I guess it's the same thing.
Yeah,
scary stuff.
Yeah, a declassified memo issued in 1950. Some of these stuff came out during the 70s when all this stuff was kind of being broke loose.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea of what they were, because it's kind of what they were talking about. So can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against the fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation?
It sounds like the monologue of a villain.
Exactly.
How can we bend him to our will?
I kid. Some of our listeners that that maybe play video games and the Fallout game.
Yeah.
They talk about the Enclave doing all these secret experiments on people. I'm like, no wonder where they get the inspiration from, because
wasn't also
part of our government was doing this kind of stuff.
Vault-Tec was like the government had Vault-Tec do a bunch of experiments on a bunch of people. Yeah, crazy.
Well, it's engineered chaos.
Yeah, there you
go. The new tools of mind control. Wow.
Well, I'm gonna tell you that just kind of a show to watch is a Netflix miniseries called Wormwood.
Oh, I think I've heard of that.
That kind of explains actually the really goes into the Frank Olson case.
Okay,
that kind of talks about all this.
Interesting.
Matter of fact, no one knew about this stuff really until Seymour Hersh with the New York Times. He was a New York Times reporter in 1974. He reported on the front page of the Times. That's how this stuff kind of came to the forefront of people's attention.
Yeah.
Well, back then, reporters were real reporters doing real reporting and looking for real stories, not this, liberal agenda that everybody's saying the same crap now. Watergate was broken by reporters. There were, the Iran-Contra was a reporter. A lot of we just don't have that anymore.
All this, when this breaks in 74, then all of a sudden the pressure starts getting ratcheted up. People are starting to go, what the hell's going on here? And eventually there was a number of hearings. There was a Rockefeller Commission, the church hearings.
The church hearings, yes. And a lot of this, what was it in 73, the head of the CIA, I forgot his name, he ordered all the documents to be destroyed. But there were some documents that were misplaced and misfiled that actually came out.
That was what's left. That was a lot of those financial documents.
Financial documents, a lot of stuff that came out.
Yeah, that was Richard Helms.
That's it. Richard
Helms and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Richard, we haven't mentioned his name, but he was the matter of fact, his nickname was called I have it here, the Poisoner in Chief.
Stop. Wow.
Yeah, because Kisner writes about Gottlieb and MK Ultra in his new book, Poisoner in Chief. So yeah, he was in charge of. So when Richard Helms becomes part of the director of the CIA, and eventually when their time ends, he basically let's get rid of all this stuff because we can't have this stuff hanging out.
Right.
Another doctor, I think maybe y'all heard, was Jolly West. Did y'all hear that name?
West does sound familiar.
Jolly West, Dr. Lewis J. West. Now, he went to his death basically claiming he never participated in MK Ultra, but the guy that did the book on chaos, I believe, uncovered his notes at UCLA.
Okay.
He was very much involved, but he did a lot of experiments on animals.
Okay.
He supposedly killed an elephant with LSD.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
What the hell is the point of that?
I guess, but in fact, I was watching a video.
Probably to learn dosages.
Well, I watched a video where they implanted a chip inside of a bull, and the bull was literally doing as the control was. I mean, it's just crazy stuff, man. I mean. It was unbelievable. But Jolly West was another. See, you have all these doctors probably working. We mentioned about all these subcategories under the umbrella MK Ultra
companies,
and all these doctors are doing their own kind of thing.
Yeah,
on how to control. And
a lot of universities have got caught up in that, getting the research funding and things like that, figuring out, Well,
a lot of them didn't realize it was CIA money.
That's what I'm saying. They didn't realize what they were getting until it was too late, and then, whatever they had is gone, and they can't do anything about it.
The FBI also kind of had a part in this, too. They had their own program called COINTELPRO. It was in San Francisco in 1967. Unfortunately, they're a little bit more scrutinized than the CIA was.
Oh, yeah.
Because, as we know, they're not supposed to operate on American soil.
The CIA isn't, right.
Right, but the FBI, they had their hands in. They were worried about this counterculture that was coming up in the late 60s, J. Edgar Hoover. A lot of that was, there was a lot of fear that they thought communists were infiltrating the hippie movement and, undermining the U.S. government and spreading this kind of communistic stuff to other people. So, it's But yeah, MK, I found this kind of interesting. It falls under a thing called cryptonyms.
Okay.
That's what they call it. It's made up of it's called a digraph, and it's MK, and then ultra, and there's a whole different kind of things. But unfortunately, a lot of this stuff that's on the internet now was used between the 50s and the 80s. So probably all that has been completely undone.
Oh, yeah.
And now the CAA's got a whole different classification of how they classify their programs. So yeah, it's I thought that was pretty interesting. But Elizabeth Nixon in 1994, a Canadian writer and journalist, wrote a novel called The Monkey Puzzle. I don't know if y'all saw that. That was pretty good. It documents the CIA's brainwashing trials in Montreal, Canada, during the 50s and 60s. It says in her novel, she told that her mother was under the care of Dr. Cameron, and he used that toxin called the one curare, on her mother. Basically ruined her mother for all intents and purposes. But President Ford, I said I had the number for that executive order, is 11905. And that information was released under the Freedom of Information Act. So that's where a lot of this documentation comes from that time. So yeah, this was a quite a in-depth. I urge people. There's a lot of good videos that really go into a lot of in-depth. I mean, we would be here all day.
Well, it's like you said, we
that.
can only kind of give you the 10,000-foot view. You can research this and go further.
There's also some great podcasts as well that also I've listened to in the past couple of weeks coming up to this that went into some really great detail on.
You can really get really in depth with this stuff and really kind of get into some of the experiments done at Ravenscraig.
Yeah.
Some of these other institutions was done. You can
also focus on certain people.
Midnight Climax. You can focus on the children. You can focus on the stuff that Jolly West with animals. Matter of fact, I was reading on Jolly West. They were trying to possibly equip dolphins.
Yeah,
as means of cats to spy on. Where they would basically be a recorder.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes. So, I mean, just absolutely crazy stuff. But to me, what I found very interesting is the idea that they plugged in the chip of the electrodes in the bull's brain and were controlling the animal.
Right.
Well, if they were doing that, I can only imagine what they've perfected by now. Could animals, in essence, be biohacked?
Yeah.
And made to do things.
Right.
That just to me is it just can be fascinating.
And if y'all want us to go deeper, this is kind of a conversation-based show.
Yeah.
If y'all want us to go deeper, let us know. Let us know what y'all want. I had a listener, his name is Juan. He wrote us a great review here I'd like to share with y'all. He said, I listened to the episode about JFK. I think it was brilliant. I also think the podcast is high quality and you all have voices you want to listen to. Not necessarily agreeing with each other, but you take the time to give each other space and listen to each other. It's nice to hear people have actual conversations rather than just interrupting each other with their opinions. I studied sound engineering for 3 years and worked on various radios and podcast shows in Sweden in my 20s. I honestly think you got an awesome podcast and will be listening to it more. I love having shows like this in the background when I'm working on my drawings and paintings, and I will be recommending this to my friends and family. I love that.
How nice.
And so y'all let us know.
Yeah.
And Juan, thank you for sending that review to us. And if y'all want us to go a little deeper on some of this stuff, let us know, because we like both.
Oh, yeah.
We like the conversation, and obviously we like digging into this stuff. So just let us know what y'all want.
Yeah.
And maybe we can pick it and go further into it.
We have a couple different ways you could do that. We have the email address, getoffendedtogether@gmail.com. We also have comment sections and ways that you can contact us, like Juan did.
We have the website. retrospectpodcast.com.
Right. So be sure to reach out, give us a like, subscribe on the platforms that you want to listen to us on. We appreciate you so much. And until next week, bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless.
They didn't stop experimenting on the mind because they failed. They stopped because they learned it worked. The broken minds, the shattered identities, the silent obedience were proof of concept. And now, they don't need hidden labs or secret drugs. Now the experiment is global. It's on your screen. It's in your feed. It's in your thoughts. This show, they're not hiding it anymore because they've trained us not to look. Thank you for joining us today. You're the best. Peace.